Hello everyone, I am Carlos. I am a 3D artist here at Venturit. We use Blender here at Venturit to create these assets for the designs that we are going to use in our apps. For example, I create a couple of 3D assets for use in our internal project Security. Security is an app that helps us track our pet's location in case they get lost. So in case you are in need to do something like this, I'm going to show you a couple of tips and tricks that I found very helpful in my use of Blender for this kind of designs. The first tip is modeling with modifiers and vertex groups. You can use these modifiers as solidify, bevel, and subdivision to create a window that is very similar in programs like Sketch or XD. And the most important thing is that using modifiers with a simple plane, you can stretch or squash. It will not change his corners, the sizes of these corners. And you can use vertex groups, so you can tell Blender what exactly vertex or edges you want to modify. The second tip is not be afraid of endguns. In this kind of designs and in this kind of 3D productions, speed is more important than watts, for example. In this case, you want to model really fast. So it's better for you if you don't worry about endguns and the geometry to be perfect. So don't worry about it. Like I'm showing you right now, this kind of endguns doesn't render in a bad way. They render perfectly. So just go ahead and leave it that way, so you don't spend time correcting geometry that is going to be exactly like if it was in the correct way. Remember that we have to be careful in the geometry when this kind of things are going to be an animation production or is going to be deformed. So in the case you only need one image has impurity, you don't need to worry about any guns. The third tip is use the basis of texturing, as simple as that. Principle BSDF is the perfect shader for almost all cases that you are going to use Blender in UI UX designs. Play around with the rawness and specular, depending how shiny, how matte you want it. So play with those parameters and you are going to get a very cool look. If you want something a little realistic, Principle BSDF is not working for you, just go to ccotextures.com. They have a whole library of assets for you to use as a shader. They have metals, woods, bricks, and everything you need to make your design look realistic. I'm going to leave you an image on how you are going to connect these assets into Blender so they look as realistic as possible. Tip number 4. Change the color manager. Filmic color manager is great for animation and VFX, for example, too. You want to play with color as much as possible in post-production. But again, speed is very important in UX and UI, and you want things faster and don't go to Photoshop and fix that and then go back in Blender and fix and tweak and go back and forward for fixing these kind of things. If you go to color manager and change it Filmic to standard, everything is going to look exactly as you put it in the shaders tab. Remember, standard, not Filmic, when you are in UI UX. Tip number 5. Infinite background. I give you two options to create a infinite background. Option number 1 is to work with the light. So you create a plane for your background and you put a light. But the light is very hard. As much as you move it, it looks very odd and very strange. The key here is to create a light very far from the subject, very big from the subject, and very powerful from the subject. And that way you create soft shadows and you illuminate the background very regular. If the shadows are too hard or too dark, you can create another light opposite to the principal light, but dim it a little bit. So you can feel that shadows a little more and they don't become so dark. Option number 2 is not to use any background and use the composer. Just add the alpha over and that's it. You have a perfect solid background. And finally, rendering. I saved this for last because it kind of gets tricky depending on what you need. So let's say you have a plane as your background. So that is the easiest way. Just remember to add a little more samples, check the denoiser, and that's it. Your render is going to be fast and ready. Let's say you need transparent background. Here's when it becomes a little complicated because Blender doesn't denoise the shadows. So you pick the object that is in your background, you check the shadow capture, and you hit render. You put that image in Photoshop, or in my case in the composer, and you see that the shadow is going to be noisy. Sadly, the only way to work this around is to deactivate the denoiser, deactivate dynamic sample, and bump the samples. I have found that 1000 samples is enough for the shadows to go really smooth. Hopefully your design is not that complicated and is worth the wait. The second thing, if you are using the composer as I tell you minutes ago, remember to uncheck the denoiser, uncheck the dynamic samples, and go to the layer passes and activate the denoiser passes and add the denoiser in the composer in the nodes. That way your image is going to render faster, is going to render with less noise. And finally, the final trick for rendering is rendering without shadows and add the shadows in Photoshop. I know it doesn't sound like the best, but sometimes it's faster doing it that way. I hope you have learned something today and see you on the next one.